Hi, my name is Jenny Feick. Welcome to the ninth in a series of educational video webinars for the Great Divide Trail Association about the natural history of the Great Divide area. This one covers certain aspects of the flora of the Great Divide that you'll see in late summer into autumn. The Great Divide Trail Association is committed to reconciliation, which starts by taking this and every opportunity to acknowledge our honor and privilege to work and play within the Treaty 7 territory. We honor and acknowledge that the GDT passes through traditional Indigenous territory of the Blackfoot Confederacy, the Stoney Iyahe Nakota, the Tsuut'ina Cree, the Shwehepma, the Klekley Dena, the Tanaha, the Sinixt, and the Métis. The Great Divide Trail Association would like to invite you to advocate for what you love and to preserve nature for future generations to enjoy, while educating yourselves and others on Indigenous history and perspectives. This video is the ninth in a series of natural history-oriented presentations called The Nature of the Great Divide series. This Nature of the Great Divide talk focuses on the seeds, berries, and fall foliage that you will see along the Great Divide. Before I begin the talk, I'll just share a bit about my background. I have a Bachelor of Science in Environmental Biology with a minor in Physical Geography, a Master's in Environmental Science, and a PhD in Natural Resources Geography, all from the University of Calgary. I had a two-part career. The first part was with Parks Canada, and I started off as a park naturalist in Mount Revelstoke and Glacier National Parks, Waterton Lakes, Kootenay National Parks, and then did other positions in Banff and Yoho National Parks and in the Western Regional Office in Calgary before working out in Atlantic Canada and Terra Nova National Park in Newfoundland. From 2000 to 2012, I managed various programs for the British Columbia Provincial Ministry of Environment, including habitat protection, terrestrial ecosystem science, stewardship outreach, a climate change adaptation for nature, and environmental policy. I retired from full-time government work in 2012, and my husband, wildlife biologist Ian Hatter, and I now live in Invermere, BC, where we are much closer to the GDT. In terms of my connection with the GDT and the GDTA, I was one of the so-called original six on the Project Great Divide Trails crew in 1974, who surveyed the route between Waterton Lakes and Banff National Parks. I was one of the founders of the first iteration of the Great Divide Trail Association, a past board member for several years, and a past president for one term. I have hiked a lot of the Great Divide Trail in sections over the years, although not anything north of Wilmore Wilderness Park yet. When the GDTA was resurrected in 2013, I rejoined and started volunteering in trail work parties and also writing articles for the GDTA's Pathfinder newsletter. And in addition to that, I am the compiler and editor of both of the editions of Tales from the Great Divide, vignettes on the origins and early history of Canada's Great Divide Trail and Great Divide Trail Association. And this is a self-published compendium of the stories from individuals involved firsthand in the start and development of the Great Divide Trail and the Great Divide Trail Association. Here's what I will cover in this talk. The first part will cover some botanical context and details on the types of seed plants you will see along the GDT, as well as the berries and other fruit you may find. In the next section, I'll mention where to find seed plants, berries, and fall foliage in the vicinity of the Great Divide. and I'll wrap up with some relevant suggestions on how best to safeguard nature while hiking on the GDT. Looking at the hierarchy of life diagram that I have shown in most of the previous videos in this series, in this talk, I focus on the plant kingdom. The flora of the Great Divide refers to the plant life growing in this area. As I mentioned in videos number 2, 3, and 4, there are two types of plants, non-vascular and vascular plants. Vascular just means that these plants transport fluids containing nutrients up and down their trunks or stems. There are 4 types of vascular plants: the lycophytes or club mosses, the ferns, the gymnosperms, which are primarily conifers in the Great Divide area, the angiosperms, or flowering plants. Club mosses and ferns do not produce seeds. They reproduce via spores that grow in spore cases or sporangia that are clustered together in the clubs on the top of the club mosses and in an organ called the sori on the undersides of the fern fronds. When you look at a forest structure as you hike on the GDT, you mostly see the vascular land plants, especially the trees and shrubs typical of the Rocky Mountains. You may also notice some of the forbs, which are herbaceous flowering plants that have obvious flowers. All of these plants produce seeds. Some produce berry-like fruit. Some, but not all, create beautiful fall foliage. The spermatophytes are the vascular plants that produce seeds, so they're also known as the seed plants. The seeds are encased in cones in the case of conifers. In flowering plant species, including broad-leaved deciduous trees and shrubs, the seeds can be winged or in a pod or inside a fruit. Once the plant has reproduced and before winter sets in, the green pigment chlorophyll needed for photosynthesis is withdrawn from the leaves, leaving the other colorful pigments. Wherever there are spermatophytes, there will be seeds, berries, and fall foliage. So they are the focus of this talk. When one considers the diversity of life on Earth, its biodiversity, there are 362,059 species of spermatophytes that have been named, described, and cataloged in the World Plant Database. This includes 1,217 species of gymnosperms and 360,842 species of angiosperms, flowering plants. Seed plants constitute 90% of land plant diversity on Earth and dominate almost all terrestrial vegetation. Although globally, only 6% of all vascular plant species are gymnosperms, they dominate the Rocky Mountain landscape. That's because gymnosperms include the conifers, and conifers are the dominant tree species, as well as a significant shrub species in the Great Divide area. Coniferous trees bear cones and have needle-shaped leaves. Most species of conifers are evergreens. Angiosperms bear flowers. They tend to have broad leaves of varying shapes and sizes. Many species, especially the flowering trees and bigger flowering shrubs, are deciduous, meaning they shed their leaves in the autumn, creating the fall foliage that we find so attractive. The larches are an exception, as although they are conifers, they are deciduous. And I'll tell you more about them later. What is a seed anyway? A seed is comprised of a plant embryo and food reserve enclosed in a protective outer covering called a seed coat or testa. They have similar basic parts, be they gymnosperm or angiosperm. Why are seeds a big deal? The formation of the seed is the defining part of the process of reproduction and marked a major advancement in plant evolution. Examples of spermatophytes include the seed cones of conifers, such as this lodgepole pine, and berry-like fruit containing seeds produced by flowering plants like the false Solomon seal. Other more primitive vascular plants, such as ferns, horsetails, and club mosses, and non-vascular plants, such as true mosses and liverworts, use spores instead of seeds and use water-dependent means to propagate themselves. You can see where the spores are stored in sori underneath this ladyfern leaf and in sporangia sticking out of this juniper paracarp moss. Seeds have many advantages over spores, including being better protected so that they can survive for extended periods of time at reduced metabolic rates. Seeds can survive even in conditions that are unfavorable for the parent plants. They are easier to disperse, and seeds enable more genetic diversity. These benefits have allowed seed plants to dominate the earth, including all 3 vegetation zones in the Canadian Rockies. Angiosperms include not only the wildflowers that grace the forest floor and alpine meadows, but also flowering shrubs and trees and graminoids, the grass-like plants. Flowering shrubs and trees are deciduous. Most deciduous species in the Rocky Mountains have broad leaves and bare flowers. Seeds are the result of plant reproduction. Specifically, they are products of fertilization of an ovule by pollen. During the pollination period, the male and female tissues in seed plants interact with each other in a number of ways, depending on if the plant is a gymnosperm or an angiosperm. In gymnosperms, like the conifers, ovules sit inside the female or seed cones. Fertilization takes place through wind pollination. Angiosperms, or flowering plants, need other organisms for pollination, which is how the euphemism started about explaining sex as being all about the birds and the bees. In conifers, there are male cones and female cones. Male cones produce an excess amount of pollen, and on windy spring days, pollen spreads. During conifer pollinating season, you may see yellow dust coating alpine ponds or even your car in the parking lot. While the air fills with pollen, the female cones secrete a sticky substance to embrace the pollen granules once they land. Reproduction begins when one of the pollen grains from inside a pollen sac on the male cone floats through the air to the scale of a female cone. A pollen tube then grows from the pollen grain towards the female ovule. This process can take a year or more. Pollen grains that land inside the developing female cone fertilize an embryo there, and that embryo becomes a seed. In the flowering plants, when pollen lands on the flower's stigma, it germinates and forms a pollen tube, which then quickly grows towards the plant's ovary. Depending on the species, this will take just less than an hour to just over a day. Meanwhile, the ovary gets ready by developing the 8-celled embryo sac. Once the pollen tube reaches an ovule inside the ovary, it bursts to release 2 sperm cells that fertilize the ovule and initiate seed formation in a unique process called double fertilization. In double fertilization, 1 sperm cell fuses with the egg cell in the ovule to form the zygote. The other joins the polar nuclei in other cells in the embryo sac to form the endosperm, which is the tissue that surrounds and nourishes the embryo in the seeds of angiosperms. Double fertilization is the key event in the life cycle of angiosperms, distinguishing them from gymnosperms. Seeds are the product of the ripened ovule after the sperm from a pollen grain has fertilized the embryo sac, forming a fertilized egg called a zygote. The embryo within a seed develops from the zygote and grows within the mother plant to a certain size before growth is halted. At that point, the seed is ready to be dispersed. In flowering plants, the ovary ripens into a fruit, which contains the seed and serves to disseminate it. The process illustrated here is for angiosperms. However, it is similar in gymnosperms, although the time interval between pollination and fertilization is much longer than in angiosperms, and gymnosperms do not experience double fertilization. In gymnosperms, no special structure develops to enclose the seeds, which begin their development naked on the bracts of cones. However, the seeds become covered by the cone scales as they develop in most conifer species in the Rocky Mountains. Exceptions are the yews and junipers, and I'll say more about them later. Angiosperm seeds are enclosed seeds produced in a hard or fleshy structure called a fruit that encloses them for protection. Many structures commonly referred to as seeds are actually dry fruits. Some fruits have layers of both hard and fleshy materials. Whitebark and limber pine produce large and nutritious naked seeds that are preferred by many animals, including American red squirrels, grizzly and black bears, Clark's nutcrackers, and Steller's jays. Whitebark pine seeds weigh an average of 180 milligrams compared to just 3 to 13 milligrams for the seeds of other coniferous trees in the subalpine zone. In the montane zone, limber pine seeds are similarly sized. Whitebark pine seeds contain by weight about 52% fat, 21% carbohydrates, and 21% protein. Their fat content exceeds that of butter, and they are more calorie dense than a chocolate bar. Their large size, high nutrient content, and durability make whitebark pine seeds a high-quality, concentrated, and long-lasting food source. The seeds remain viable when buried for 12 months or more. Other high-elevation foods degrade much more quickly. Typically, birds and mammals harvest almost all the viable seeds that are produced by a whitebark pine. Both limber and whitebark pine depend on Clark's nutcrackers for seed dispersal and successful regeneration. Clark's nutcrackers remove seeds from the cone on the tree and disperse them into caches of 1 to 5 seeds for distances typically of a few meters to several kilometers away from the tree, and even as far as 22 kilometers from the source tree. They can carry up to 25 seeds at a time in a sublingual pouch and have been estimated to cache more than 30,000 seeds per hectare in 1 year. Steller's jays, which I just took off the screen, they also harvest seeds from open cones and cache them in the ground or other sites, but as they don't occur in most of the range of limber pine in Alberta, and their role in the Canadian Rockies appears to be much less important even with whitebark pine. I made them disappear. Douglas fir seeds provide food for a number of small mammals, including chipmunks, mice, shrews, and American red squirrels. Many songbirds eat the seeds right out of the cone. In the case of subalpine larch, American red squirrels, lesser redpolls, and the pine siskins are the ones that favor those seeds. White spruce seeds provide a primary food source for American red squirrels and are also eaten by deer mice, northern redback voles, meadow voles, and shrews. Engelmann spruce seeds are palatable to small mammals and birds. However, they are low in protein and only fair in energy value. Several birds, including chickadees, nuthatches, crossbills, pine siskins, and Clark's nutcrackers, remove and eat the seeds from subalpine fir cones. Because subalpine fir seeds are large, comprising about 26% of a cone's weight, they are an energy-efficient food source for small birds. Chipmunks and mice also eat subalpine fir seeds. However, although they find them palatable, American red squirrels will consume subalpine fir seeds only after they have eaten the cache seeds of all of the other conifer species. Least chipmunks prepare seeds before they cache them, a technique that discourages pilfering from other animals. Upon finding a seed source, least chipmunks usually remove the seed hull as they pouch the seed, put the seed in the pouch in their cheek. Alternatively, they may pouch unhulled seeds, move to another place, often near cover, to carry out the hulling and repouching process. Hulling reduces seed volume. They get rid of the shell. So these chipmunks typically can return to the seed source and collect more seeds before transporting them to scatter or larder hordes. Hulling also increases each individual's transport efficiency. Once seeds have been hulled, least chipmunks often expel a tightly packed cluster of seeds covered in a thick saliva-based coating. This bolus, which is the technical term for the gooey food blobs, then dries and hardens as a single cement-like unit after it is cached. Least chipmunks also place their caches in less predictable locations. In other words, away from other caches and away from environmental beacons that are obvious, than do other chipmunk species. And it's a key to their success. Canada jays use a similar technique. From June until autumn, these jays make many thousands of little homemade energy balls, making up to 1,000 caches daily. They carefully chew their food morsels and coat the resulting mixture in lavish amounts of their sticky saliva, which is believed to possess antibacterial qualities. They then tuck their sustainable spitball snacks in crevices in conifer branches, among conifer needles and tree lichens, and under the bark of conifer trees. They favor the cool, very shaded, branchy areas in spruces, the intersections of branches and twigs, and where a branch emerges from a trunk. Supersized salivary glands that stretch from the corner of a Canada jay's bill and almost meet inside the back of his head supply the superglue that keeps the boluses intact and firmly stuck to where they're cached. Unlike other corvids, these jays do not need heavy bills to hammer or chop hard frozen food in the winter. They can easily use their blunt little bill to detach a bolus and thaw it out in their mouths. The fruiting stage of the flowering plants that flourish in the Great Divide area, while essential biologically, also provide beautiful displays that GDT hikers can appreciate, such as this field of white past flowers, the seed phase of which are called hippies on a stick. By summer's end, instead of wildflowers, you'll see the results of pollination. thousands of seed heads, most of which depend on the wind to disperse their seeds. Here we see the flower, then the seed heads of tall goldenrod, wild nodding onion, the yellow Agaceris, and the orange Agaceris, the two native dandelion species that are up in the Alpine. Here we see the flowers followed by the seed heads of common yarrow, smooth blue aster, shiny leaf meadowsweet, and yellow mountain avens. And now a cautionary note. In addition to all the fresh parts of the mountain death camas, its leaves, bulbs, and flowers being poisonous, the dried parts, especially seeds and capsules, are even more potent. Ingestion by humans can cause severe illness and death, even for adults, so avoid them. Graminoids, the grass-like plants, are flowering plants that are more recently evolved. The flowers of sedges, rushes, and grasses are not very showy, but they get the job of reproduction done efficiently. It is the seed heads that we tend to notice. By the way, most of the grains that people eat, wheat, maize, rice, barley, oats, rye, millet, are the seeds of members of the grass family. Graminoids are not considered to be forbs. Grass morphology is streamlined, with flowers so reduced in size that they are not readily recognized as such by us or pollinators. The seeds of grasses are carried on spikelets at the top of the flowering shoots or culms of the grass plants. This elevation and the waviness of the grass aids in getting both their pollen and their seeds dispersed by the wind. Even in full bloom, the flowers of birches, poplars, alders, and willows hardly look like flowers at all. They have no showy petals, nor do they have any fragrance. Such flowers are called catkins, after their resemblance to kitten tails, from the old Dutch word for kitten, catkin. Cats are long, slim clusters of tiny flowers that are either male or female. They bear scaly bracts and usually lack petals. Catkins may be erect or pendulous and are often somewhat inconspicuous. The male catkins produce copious amounts of pollen, which the wind carries to female catkins or from male catkins to female spike flowers. Depending on the species, a catkin-producing plant may be monoecious, where both male and female flowers are present on a single individual, as in the case of alders, or dioecious, where the female and male flowers are borne on separate individuals, as with the willows. Numerous willows make their home in the Rockies. Some of the ones you will likely encounter along the GDT include, clockwise from the top left, the attractive and aptly named rock willow, which many people do not even realize is a willow, the Barrett's willow, the smooth willow, it's obviously not called smooth for its catkins, and the tiny, low-profile Rocky Mountain willow that ekes out a living on alpine tundra. Willow species vary greatly in appearance, and the catkins help to distinguish what type of willow you're looking at. Some species hybridize, making identification to the species level challenging. Willow catkins start out as what we commonly call pussy willows. At the tail end of winter, fuzzy nubs start to appear along the branches of willows. These soft silver tufts that resemble tiny cat's paws are actually flowers just before they fully bloom. The soft coating of hairs acts as insulation to protect these early bloomers from cold temperatures. Since they're among the very first to bloom, they're especially delightful harbingers of spring. But we are focused in this talk on the other end of the plant life cycle, late summer, fall, and the transition to winter, when willow catkins develop their fluffy seeds that use a parachute effect to ride the breeze. Willows produce an abundance of seed, which is dispersed by the wind every autumn. They can also reproduce vegetatively and are extremely successful at colonizing any area with sufficient moisture, as GDTA volunteers maintaining the GDT know well. Besides using the wind, plants have evolved myriad ways to disperse their seeds, including bursting to fling seeds some distance from the mother plants, using water transport, hitching rides on the exterior of animals, including humans, and even enticing animals to ingest their seeds, a form of interior hitchhiking. Animals eat the plant seed pods or fruit and then excrete what they cannot digest, including the seeds. Seeds of these plants often do not even germinate until they have passed through the digestive tract of an animal. The Canada buffalo berry is an example. The relationships among fruit-producing plants and fruit eating by primarily birds and mammals is one of the most fascinating examples of mutually beneficial co-evolution. Certain flowering plants, especially many of the flowering shrubs you will see along the GDT, develop edible fruit. The plants enclose their seed or seeds in a fleshy, ripened ovary. Botanically, dry seed pods or capsules are also considered fruit. However, the popular definition of what constitutes a fruit is that it should be sweet and either succulent or pulpy. There are different kinds of fruit. Simple fruits are illustrated here with agricultural fruit examples. There are pommes, pronounced like the French word for apple, the fruit with cores containing seeds. Then there are drupes, also called stone fruit because of the one big pit or stone inside them. Hesperidiums are the citrus fruits with their juicy sections. And last but not least are berries and epigenous berries. Simple fruits are the result of the ripening to fruit of a simple or compound ovary in a single flower with a single pistil. Some of the different types of simple fruits along the GDT that are edible include the ones pictured here. Choke cherries are drupes. Saskatoons are pommes because, like apples and pears, they have a crunchy, mealy core. Black crowberries are true berries, and blueberries are epigenous berries. I'll say more about these so-called false berries in a bit. Besides simple fruits, such as wild currants, there can also be aggregate fruits like the various wild brambles and raspberries. These fruits develop from flowers that have more than one pistil. They consist of a mass of small drupes that develop from separate ovaries. In addition, there are compound or multiple fruits, which are fruits that develop from many flowers packed together, such as elderberries. Then there are accessory fruits, like the strawberries. The edible tissues in the fruit arise from plant parts other than the ovary. Examples of the different types of more complex edible fruits along the GDT include wild raspberries and thimbleberries, which are aggregate fruits. The Rocky Mountain elder, which is a multiple or compound fruit, and the blue leaf strawberry, which is an accessory fruit. So, what is a berry? In everyday English, a berry is any small edible fruit. Although many small seeds may be present, berries lack the stone or pit that's found in a stone fruit or a drupe. Most people tend to think of berries as being round, brightly colored, juicy, a bit squishy, tasting sweet or sour, and able to be plucked off a plant, be it a forb, a bush, or a tree. People called certain fruits berries thousands of years before scientists developed a precise definition. The science of botany defines a berry as a fleshy fruit without a stone or pit, produced from a single flower containing one ovary that is superior, meaning on top of the receptacle. In botany, an ovary is the enlarged basal portion of the pistil, the female organ of the flower. The ovary contains ovules, which develop into seeds upon fertilization from pollen. The ovary itself will mature into a fruit, either dry or fleshy, enclosing the seeds. An ovary attached above other floral parts is termed superior. When it lies below the attachment of other floral parts, it is called inferior. It has nothing to do with its quality or status. The berry is the most common type of fleshy fruit in which the entire outer layer of the ovary wall ripens into a potentially edible pericarp. A pericarp is the part of a fruit formed from the wall of the ripened ovary. The suffix carp stems from the word carpel, which refers to the pistil, the female organ of the flower. Berries may be formed from one or more carpels from the same flower, i.e., from a simple or compound ovary. The seeds are usually embedded in the fleshy interior of the ovary. Carpels are modified leaves that bear seeds and comprise the innermost whorl of a flower. One or more carpels make up the pistil. Fertilization of an egg within a carpel by a pollen grain from another flower results in seed development within the carpel. All true berries have three distinct fleshy layers: the exocarp, or outer covering layer, the mesocarp, which is the fleshy middle, and the endocarp, the innermost part that holds the seeds. The skin of the berry is its exocarp. Its edible interior makes up its mesocarp, and the jelly-like innards holding the seeds comprise its endocarp. Berry-like fruits have been a valuable food source for humans since before the start of agriculture and remain among the primary food sources of other primates. No doubt about it, there is something primal about eating wild berries plumped up by the rain and warmed by the sun. Taking a berry break along the GDT can generate pure joy. Wild berries are the most widely used plant food stewarded and consumed by Indigenous peoples in the United States and Canada. Indigenous peoples put in place rules and practices to respect, honor, and sustain berry patches over thousands of years, a tradition we would be wise to continue. Examples of true berries that you may find along the GDT include any of the species of wild currants or wild gooseberries, Oregon grape, creeping mahonia, and crowberries. Of these, the wild currants, gooseberries, and crowberries can be eaten raw, but the other two require cooking and the addition of a sweetening agent to make them palatable. The term epigenous berries refers to berries that develop from an inferior ovary, i.e., one that's attached to below the other floral parts. In these so-called false berries, they include tissue derived from parts of the flower besides just the ovary. The floral tube, formed from the basal part of the sepals, petals, and stamens, can become fleshy at maturity and unite with the ovary to form the fruit. Wild examples include members of the genus Vaccinium in the heath family, such as cranberries, blueberries, and huckleberries. Here are some of the delicious edible species of vacciniums that both hikers and wildlife enjoy along the GBT. Black mountain huckleberry, grouseberry, low billberry, cascade blueberry, and oval-leaved blueberry. While it's fine to sample a few of these juicy berries as you hike the GDT, keep in mind that these are vital food for bears and other wildlife. Most people call any small, round, edible wild fruit a berry, whether it is a true berry or not. What is more accurate is to call it a bacchus fruit or berry-like fruit. All four species pictured here could be called bacchus or berry-like fruits, although even though only one of them is a true berry, botanically speaking. Besides the highly desirable berry-like fruits along the GDT, like these wild strawberries, you will see countless other berries that may look attractive, but it's best to leave them for the wildlife. Such is the case with the Canada buffalo berry, which is common in the montane and lower subalpine forest zones. Although not very tasty for people, it is one of the most important foods for bears prior to hibernation. Unfortunately, the recent hotter temperatures in the Northern Rockies in Canada create a troubling mismatch between bears' peak foraging weeks and the height of buffalo berry season. In as little as 60 years, buffalo berries could ripen up to 3 weeks earlier, with these temporal shifts more extreme at higher elevations. In Banff National Park, wildlife specialists report that the hot and arid conditions of 2021 and 2022 led to an 80% reduction in the buffalo berry crop from its 2020 level. Here is a Canada buffalo berry from its early spring flowers to the developing fruit, a plum, which starts out green and then turns yellow, then orange, and finally red as it ripens. Although Indigenous peoples have traditional ways of preparing and consuming buffalo berries, the methods require a lot of knowledge, skill, and time. So if you're just passing through and don't have that background, it's better to leave these berries for the bears. They need them more than we do. Other berries that are edible, if properly prepared, include the Rocky Mountain elder, the chokecherry, squashberry or lowbush cranberry, and creeping snowberries. You can probably eat a few raw, but more than that could cause stomach upset unless you cook them first. Be cautious about eating these berry-like fruits. Mountain ash fruit is extremely bitter and unpleasant to the taste for humans, even though birds love them, especially after the first frost when their sugar content rises and they ferment. False Solomon seal capsules can have a laxative effect on people, as can the starry false Solomon seal. The two species of bearberry, both the common or bearberry or kinnikinick and the red bearberry, which grows at very high elevations, produce the opposite effect. Bears eat bearberries just before they go into hibernation, as it creates a fecal plug, ensuring that they do not defecate while asleep in their winter den. That's probably not what you want to experience while you're on the GDT. Certain species of plants produce fruit that is noxious for humans. We lack the digestive enzymes necessary to process it. The pale commandra, or bastard toadflax, is known to concentrate selenium in its tissues. If selenium is present in the soil, as it is throughout the Elk Valley of British Columbia, this plant will be rendered poisonous. Even if there isn't selenium in the soil, eating more than a few of these berries will cause nausea. Nearly all fruit produced by members of the lily family contain poisonous compounds. The blue capsules of the Queen's Cup lily, also known as the blue bead lily, are lethal. The bunchberry or dwarf dogwood produces fruit that will cause stomach irritation and digestive problems if eaten. All species of snowberry are toxic, and eating them causes violent retching. Leave all of these for wildlife who can digest them. Some of the other poisonous berries you will see on the GDT include these ones. Clockwise from the upper left, both the red baneberries and the white baneberries are deadly. Even though bears can and do eat devil's club berries, people lack the digestive enzymes necessary to eat them safely. The capsules of all species of twisted stalk, like those of nearly all of the lily family, are lethal. The twinberry honeysuckle or black twinberry is an enigma, as some sources claim it is edible, but most list it as toxic. Don't take a chance, even though it may at first glance look like the highly desirable black huckleberry. Certain species of plants produce something that looks like a berry, but is not. The seed inside each of these three berry-like Pacific yew cones are deadly poisonous, capable of killing a person. In the upper left-hand corner is a willow apple gall that contains the larval form of an insect, a developing sawfly. The berry-like structure is abnormal plant tissue that grows in response to the presence of the insect. Although not toxic, trying to consume a gall would not be a pleasant experience. Likewise, the rose gall wasp lays its eggs on wild rose bushes, creating galls that look a bit like crab apples. They are not the fruit of the rose, which is a drupe called a rose hip. Rose hips are edible, although very seedy. They are full of vitamin C and make really great tea. And here we have another one. Another example of something that hikers sometimes think is a berry, which is not a berry, nor even a fruit. These are the fleshy cones on a common juniper shrub. Many people even call them juniper berries. While not toxic, it is not a good idea to eat many of them. All juniper berries contain the powerful oil fujone. This oil can cause stomach upset, diarrhea, and kidney problems when ingested in large quantities. Even eating a few of these fleshy cones will increase your need to urinate. Since the 1600s, though, the fleshy cones of common juniper have been used to flavor gin. As I mentioned in previous talks in this series, altitude creates vegetation zones. Different plant species grow at different elevations. It is increasingly difficult for plants to grow the higher up the mountain you go, due to the harsher conditions. The most species and most lush growth tends to be in the valleys and on the lower slopes, creating the montane zone. Further up, the greater amount of snow in the winter influences what can grow. There comes a point where there is so much snow, wind, and cold temperatures in the winter that few plants can survive. Of course, seeds will be found wherever there are spermatophytes, plants that produce seeds, and that is in all three vegetation zones. There are berries in all three zones. Colorful fall foliage is most noticeable in the montane zone, at tree line, and in the alpine zone, but there is still some color under the canopy of the subalpine forest. When you hike on the GDT through the areas that cross the montane forest zone, you will probably notice that the wildflowers here bloom much sooner than those at higher elevations and exchange their flowers for seed heads earlier. On the ground, prairie pasque flower is usually the first to make the change, followed by hookspur violet, also known as the early blue violet, Climbing on trees and shrubs, you'll see the wild purple clematis vine make its transition. Later on, in shady spots on the forest floor, the rattlesnake plantain orchid exchanges its green flower stalk for a brown seed head. You will see the false green hellebore along many parts of the GDT that travel through the upper montane and subalpine forest zones right up to treeline. Humans can get extremely sick from eating any part of this plant, including its greenish, intricate, star-shaped, hairy flowers borne on tall stalks, or the seed pods containing the deadly toxic seeds brimful of steroidal alkaloids. Another member of the lily family, common beargrass, only extends as far north as Section A of the GDT. The club-shaped clusters of fragrant, creamy white blossoms borne on a raceme give way to tall, fuzzy-looking seed pod stalks containing tiny, tan-colored seeds by September. Beargrass plants have deep edible rhizomes that survive fire that clears away its floral competition from the ground surface. Beargrass thrives with periodic burns and is often the first plant to sprout in a scorched area. You may notice a lot of it growing in along the GDT in the subalpine forest zone and parts of the montane zone in and around Waterton Lakes National Park in the aftermath of the Kino fire of 2017. Triangular-leaved ragwort, a tall forb found in tree-lined glades, exchanges its bright yellow ray flowers for fluffy white seed heads. And once the winged seeds have blown away in the autumn winds, one can see these starry patterned structures on the flower stalks. The showy blue and white flowers of silky lupins become bean-like seed pods, which makes sense as lupins are a type of legume known for their ability to fix nitrogen and improve soil fertility. You'll find mock azalea bushes on the mountain slopes. It's a common shrub in the subalpine forest zone along parts of the GDT. The mock azalea is in the heath family, and like other heaths, it has pink, bell-shaped flowers that point down. As its seed pods develop, they point up and turn a pale yellow. By the time the seeds are ripe and the pods ready to open to expel the seeds, they are a rusty brown color. In moist areas, the shorter, scruffy-looking Labrador tea exchanges its white blossoms for droopy beige seed pods. These two flowering plants epitomize spring and early summer in the high elevation of the Rockies. They have gone to seed by the time many people start hiking. Glacier lilies reproduce sexually from seed as well as asexually by sprouting from their corms. After being pollinated by bumblebees, other bees, and even hummingbirds, they form green seed pods. These pods dry out and open once the seeds ripen. They drop their seeds gradually and slowly as the wind or animals disturb the plants. Glacier lily seeds need 100 days of cold weather before they can germinate. It can take up to 8 years for an individual glacier lily plant to reach full reproductive maturity. The white passflower, formerly called the western anemone, emerges soon after snowmelt. It almost immediately gets pollinated and soon develops a plumed seed head covered in long silky hairs, each attached to a seed. These hippies on a stick persist until strong autumn winds blow the hairy seeds in all directions. Mountain sorrel is a perennial wildflower in the buckwheat family. Its tough taproot enables it to colonize places inhospitable to most plants, including the rocky debris left behind by glaciers as they melt and retreat. Its flowers are initially small and green. By August, they become an open, upright cluster of floral stalks, which become clusters of reddish seeds by September. The edible leaves contain vitamin C and oxalic acid, a substance that can promote kidney stone formation. The leaves taste somewhat bitter by the time the seeds appear. Hooker's mountain avens, a low-profile, mat-forming evergreen perennial in the rose family, can also live on ridges and cliffs in the Rockies, as well as on dry sites with thin gravelly soils in the alpine. Once pollinated, a woolly cluster of single-seeded achenes appears, each topped by long, silky, feathery white hairs that aid in dispersal by the fierce late autumn winds. In open areas such as avalanche slopes or along streams, cow parsnip transforms its massive white umbel-shaped flowers to parasols of green seeds by late summer that turn beige as they ripen in the fall. In areas burned by forest fires, fireweed makes its transition from showy stalks of bright pink blooms to wispy white seed heads in mid to late summer. As I mentioned before, more plants grow in the montane zone than the subalpine zone, and the fewest species grow in the alpine zone. This is also true of the flowering plant species that produce berry-like fruit. Here are some examples of different types of plants that produce bacchate fruit and in which vegetation zone those plants tend to be found. There are also several species that can be found in multiple zones. Berry production accelerates in forest areas that are regenerating after wildfires. Indigenous peoples periodically set small, low-intensity ground fires in the spring, winter, or late fall to clear vegetation to promote the growth of certain berry bushes and forage plants that benefit wildlife and to achieve other important objectives. This calendar depicts times to conduct safe, cool burns, time to mitigate fire risk, and time to harvest. The many hands in the center depict intergenerational continuity and community-based relationships with fire, which are embedded in the traditional Indigenous ecological knowledge that has been passed down for millennia. During colonization, these cultural practices were misunderstood and suppressed. Cultural burning is now better appreciated as an important natural resource management tool, along with Western science-driven prescribed burning. By the way, this calendar appeared in an excellent article in the journal Facets called "The Right to Burn: Barriers and Opportunities for Indigenous-Led Fire Stewardship in Canada." This model, based on traditional Indigenous ecological knowledge, illustrates common seasonal climatic stressors or interruptions to berry production across specific species and regions in Alaska and northern Canada. Some climatic conditions and interruptions are also applicable to temperate regions in the United States and Canada, including heavy spring rains, summer drought conditions, and shifts in the timing of natural phenomena like when berries ripen. Other terrestrial alpine habitats along the GDT that can be especially good for berry production include vertical meadows on avalanche slopes where snowslides have removed trees. Rock slides, which also result in temporary elimination and suppression of tree growth. Sometimes logged areas that are regrowing can provide suitable conditions for berry bushes, depending on how they are managed. If a logging company uses herbicides to kill any perceived competition to conifer seedlings from broadleaf deciduous trees or shrubs, the area's value plummets for not only berry production, but biodiversity in general. Most headwater valleys with clearings from a variety of natural disturbances can provide great growing conditions for blueberries and huckleberries. As the weather cools and the first snows touch the peaks, The wildflowers are replaced by seed heads and the autumn colors of the leaves. This time has its own special beauty. In terms of where to find fall foliage in the vicinity of the Great Divide, there are two primary locations, way up high near tree line and way down low in the valleys of the montane zone. Starting in September, you'll see the broad leaves on the deciduous trees in the valleys and lower slopes of the montane forest zone turning color. Most members of the poplar family turn different shades of yellow. What is happening is that in preparation for winter, trees are sending the green chlorophyll pigment down into their roots for storage, leaving the remaining colorful pigments in the leaves. In addition to the poplar and aspen trees, the leaves of other species turn golden and yellow hues, including the forb fault Solomon seal, the thimbleberries, and the Saskatoon bushes, as well as various species of willow shrubs. Mountain ash and Rocky Mountain maple join the show, adding some red hues to the fall foliage display. Foliage along the GDT in the fall can be extremely colorful. Clockwise from the upper left, shrubs like red osier dogwood and blueberry, ground covers like red bearberry, and forbs like the Canada bunchberry or dwarf dogwood turn various shades of crimson. The warm colors extend across the landscape from understory shrubs like the false azalea and swamp birch to forbs like fireweed and the Virginia strawberry. Autumn really is a beautiful time of year to hike the GDT. However, before you go, you should be warned about a phenomenon that afflicts people in the Southern Canadian Rockies every fall called larch madness. This psychological condition happens every year in the latter part of September as the subalpine larch start to change color in the high country. Masses of people drop everything and head to the vicinity of the Great Divide to worship the golden forest up a tree line. It can get quite crowded. The range of subalpine larch extends from just north of Lake Louise south to Waterton Lakes National Park, so that is where visitor use gets concentrated. There are many places along the GDT where if you hike in mid to late September, early October, you will enjoy lovely larch forests. Why this color change? Larch trees have needle-like leaves and bear cones like other conifers, but after they withdraw chlorophyll from the needles, they shed their needles each autumn, so they are deciduous trees. Adopting a deciduous lifestyle enables subalpine larch to grow large horizontal branches, even though they live near tree line where cool, harsh weather prevails for much of the year. By shedding their needles, they eliminate a huge weight from their branches and reduce the surface area so that the surface area that the tree presents to oncoming winds. Snow can fall through the branches and land on the ground rather than getting stuck on the tree. Wind can sail past the naked branches, dissipating its force. These factors all reduce the likelihood of branches breaking from the weight of snow or the force of wind during the long winter. Of course, if you succumb to larch madness, you need to be prepared for the changeable autumn weather. Frost and snow will hasten the processes of storing the chlorophyll in the roots and sealing off the connection between the twig and the needle in the larch tree. The needles will get more pale and drop off, especially as autumn winds blow. Larches use this seasonal shedding of needles to eliminate waste products, sending toxins taken in through their roots or from the air into the yellowing needles. By not having needles in the winter in Chinook-prone areas, larches also eliminate the risk of respiring when their roots remain frozen during periods of warmer than normal weather. I think this deciduous habit of the larches makes them the coolest tree on the GDT. As the chill of winter arrives, each broad-leaved deciduous tree also seals off the attachment of the leaf stem to the twig, so that the leaf no longer receives any fluids for hydration and nutrition. Each leaf dries out and blows off in the wind, settling on the ground where certain species of soil bacteria and fungi help to decompose them. This adds organic matter and returns nutrients to the soil to help the trees grow next spring. In video number 2 in the Nature of the Great Divide series, I talk about some of the tiny but mighty organisms that do this. Insects like this Darwin wasp busy themselves in the new habitat provided by the fallen leaves, seeking insect and spider prey to catch and deposit their eggs inside. While this adult female will die once winter arrives, her genes will live on in the next generation as her offspring consume their host from the inside out, snuggled below the protective cover of leaf litter and snow. By the time winter snows blanket the Canadian Rockies, most life forms have left, perished, or have entered a state of dormancy. Coniferous trees and a few evergreen ground cover species, including bearberry and mountain heath, continue photosynthesizing, but at a reduced rate. The spermatophytes bank on their seeds and fruits, including berries, to carry on their species. The colorful deciduous foliage, now faded and under the snow, will help add organic matter to the soil that will sustain plants into the future. To wrap up this talk, I will share a few thoughts on what we can do to appreciate and safeguard nature on the Great Divide. There are many excellent field guides that you can use to identify the flora and fauna of the Canadian Rockies. In terms of the flora, these include wildflowers of the Rocky Mountains, plants of the Rocky Mountains, and alpine plants of British Columbia, Alberta, and northwestern North America. Due to the weight of the field guides, it's best to carry them just on short day trips and use them to build up your identification skills before going on the GDT. The apps like Seek and iNaturalist are getting better. In fact, I think they're really excellent. They've become amazingly excellent for plants. iNaturalist is consumptive of iPhone resources, though. It uses a lot of data unless you take measures to avoid this. It is a really good idea, though, to download the app and record your observations on iNaturalist. It improves our collective understanding of which species are where and when. There are also many guidebooks on edible food plants, including berries, that provide useful information for the Canadian Rocky Mountains. One of the most important things you can do as a GDT hiker is to help safeguard nature during your trip by adhering to no trace backcountry travel principles. Just type in no trace backcountry principles in your browser and read the material under each of the 7 principles before you go. Next to habitat destruction and fragmentation, invasive alien species are the major threat to biodiversity. You can do your part to prevent the spread of terrestrial invasive alien species into the Great Divide area. A key action is to clean your hiking boots and other gear before and after you hike the GDT. Before your trip, never bring firewood from outside the Great Divide area to a campground in the Rockies, as you can transport insect pests that can adversely affect native plant species. Take pictures of any species you suspect are invasive alien species and post the pictures on iNaturalist after your trip. Key among the no trace principles is the adage to take only pictures and leave only footprints. Never pick wildflowers along the GDT. Keep in mind that when you pick a wildflower, you are ripping off its reproductive organs. Think about that. How would you feel if someone did that to you? Let the wildflowers complete their life cycle and go to seed so that the next year there will still be wildflowers for everyone to enjoy. Likewise, while consuming wild berries has its benefits, please be respectful. These plants have just invested most of their life energy to produce these ripe and succulent fruits, and they depend on the dispersal of the seeds in the berries to reproduce. Try to cause as little damage as possible. When you gather, collect no more than 10% or less of the berries you see in an area. Consider other hikers who may appreciate a few ripe huckleberries on their instant oatmeal the next morning, as well as all the birds and mammals that live there that depend on those berries for their survival. One needs to be on alert and watch out for bears during berry season and take measures to avoid disturbing them or having an encounter. Inform yourself about living in bear country and watch Nature of the Great Divide talk number 8 on mammals for some suggestions. The Great Divide Trail Association does what it can to try to establish the GDT so it looks as if it has always been there. This includes avoiding any cutting of or damage to the endangered white bark and limber pines and having a light touch when it comes to clearing away the flowering forbs. In several places, land management agencies have made structural improvements and facilitated good drainage of moisture off the trail to help protect the natural vegetation along the GDT. In other areas, shortcut trails have been closed to prevent further erosion and damage to fragile areas. Do your part by sticking to the trail and not shortcutting, which tramples native vegetation and erodes thin soils. Be especially careful during the busy summer season and March Madness season in the fall, not to add to the overcrowding and trampling of popular areas in the Canadian Rockies. That concludes my summary of the seeds, berries, and fall foliage of the Great Divide Trail area. I hope you enjoyed learning about the nature of the Great Divide in this video and others in the series, and that you enjoy the real thing as you hike the GDT. If you have questions about the series or about seeds, berries, and fall foliage of the Great Divide after watching this video, please put them in the YouTube comments along with your contact information. Enjoy nature on the Great Divide. Stay safe out there and happy trails.